Hey everyone, we're about to jump into a topic that feels like it's everywhere these days, free speech. It can get pretty confusing, so we're going to cut through all that noise and get right to what the First Amendment actually means for you in the real world. Ready? Let's get into it.
So, let's just start with a question that I'm sure has crossed a lot of our minds. You post something political on social media. Can you actually get fired for that? The short answer? Well, it's not a simple yes or no. But stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why.
To figure out the answer to that tweet question, we've got to get to the heart of what free speech really is. And you know what? It pretty much all boils down to one single, super important rule that, if you remember it, will clear up almost everything.
Okay, first things first, let's bust the biggest myth of them all. We've all heard someone say it, right? It's a free country. I can say whatever I want. And while the First Amendment is, incredibly important, it's not some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for any and all consequences.
And this right here, this is the rule. The single most important thing to remember is who is doing the restricting. Your First Amendment rights are a shield that protects you from the government. That means Congress, the police, a public school. They can't censor you. But, and this is the part everyone forgets, that shield doesn't work against private actors. Your boss at a private company, Twitter, Facebook, even your neighbor. They can all have their own rules. The First Amendment doesn't apply to them.
And you can see it right in the text of the Constitution itself. Look how it starts. Congress shall make no law. The entire point was to put a limit on the power of the federal government. It actually wasn't until later, with the 14th Amendment, that this protection got applied to your state and local governments too.
Okay, so we've got the government versus private rule down. But it gets a little deeper. Because even when you are talking about the government, your freedom of speech isn't a total blank check. The Supreme Court has spent centuries drawing some really important lines in the sand.
Think of it like this. Not all speech is created equal. At the very top, getting the most protection is political speech. I mean, criticizing the government and politicians is the absolute core of what the First Amendment is all about. Right up there with it is symbolic speech, actions that send a message, like a protest, and even things like truthful advertising.
But then you have the flip side. There are a few very specific, very narrow categories of speech that get absolutely zero protection from the government. None.
So a big one you hear about is incitement. But, and this is key, it's not just about saying something that gets people riled up. The legal test for it, called the Brandenburg test, sets a really, really high bar. Your speech has to be intended to cause violence, it has to be likely to cause it, and that violence has to be imminent. Like it's about to happen right here, right now.
So what does that actually look like? Well, yelling, "The government is corrupt, we need a revolution someday." That's just talking about an idea. That's protected. But shouting to an angry mob, "Let's go in there and drag the judge out right now," well, that's not an abstract idea anymore. That's aimed at causing immediate trouble, and it's not protected. See the difference?
And there are a few other categories that fall outside that constitutional shield. You can't just make up lies to destroy someone's reputation. That's called defamation. You can't make what the law calls true threats of violence. There's also a super narrow exception for obscenity. And of course, child pornography gets zero First Amendment protection, period.
So, you might be wondering, where did all these rules come from? Well, they weren't just made up out of thin air. They were all hammered out in the real world, through intense legal fights that went all the way to the Supreme Court. These are the stories that define the rules we live by.
Let's go back to 1969. In Des Moines, Iowa, a handful of high school students decide they're going to wear black armbands to school to protest the Vietnam War. Simple, silent protest. The school finds out and suspends them.
So they sue, and the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court comes back with this legendary line. They said students don't just leave their rights at the door when they go to school. A public school can only punish that kind of speech if they can prove it would cause a major disruption. This case is still the foundation for student rights today.
All right, now for a case that is the bedrock of American journalism. It's the 1960s, the height of the civil rights movement. The New York Times runs an ad that's critical of the police in Alabama. The ad had a few small, factual errors, and a local official sued the paper for libel and won. Big time.
But the Supreme Court stepped in and flipped the whole thing on its head. They created what's called the actual malice standard. It means that if you're a public official, it's not enough to show that something printed about you was false. You have to prove the journalist knew it was false or just didn't care if it was true or not. This gives the press what the court called breathing room to investigate and critique the government without being terrified of a lawsuit for every tiny mistake.
Now let's fast forward to a much more recent and way more controversial case that totally changed the game in American politics: Citizens United. The whole thing boiled down to a simple question: can the government legally stop a corporation from spending money to air a movie that's critical of a political candidate?
The court's decision was an absolute bombshell. They ruled 5-4 that corporations have free speech rights and, this is the big one, that spending money is a form of political speech. That one ruling wiped out decades of campaign finance laws and opened the floodgates for super PACs and the tidal wave of money we see in our elections today. But even with these huge Supreme Court rulings setting the rules for the whole country, the fight over free speech plays out differently everywhere you look. In California, a lot of the battles are over online speech and big tech. Down in Texas, it's a huge battleground over whether the state can regulate social media. And in Florida, we're seeing all these new laws being tested that restrict speech in schools and universities. It's a fight that is very much alive and kicking.
And that leads us right into our last section, where these fights are happening right now. And no surprise, the front lines of the free speech debate have gone digital.
The questions we're wrestling with today are just unbelievably tricky. Are social media companies more like the phone company, just a neutral platform? Or are they like a newspaper, making choices about what to publish? What do we do about hate speech, especially since the U.S. protects it way more than other countries do? And on college campuses, how do you protect open debate while also making sure everyone feels safe and included?
There really are no easy answers here. And what makes it even tougher is that technology is moving so fast, it's forcing us to try and apply these old principles written hundreds of years ago to situations that the founders could have never, ever dreamed of.
Which leaves us with maybe the biggest question of all for our time. The whole American idea of free speech is based on this concept of a marketplace of ideas, the belief that if everyone has their say, the truth will eventually win out. But what happens to that marketplace when AI can pump out a flood of disinformation that is so good it's impossible to tell what's real and what's fake? That's the challenge we're all facing now.